Hello everyone. So I'm making this video to discuss the concept of right. Right, not right, wrong, well, to some extent, but more the concept of being right. So again, this is like a series of videos where we look into words or ideas or concepts that are distortive in their effects. So it's important to use words, of course, when we think, when we talk to ourselves, which is basically what thinking is to some extent. But those words that we use or those concepts that we use, they should bring an increase in clarity and they should not decrease clarity. So we already have looked at some distorted concepts that are going to reduce clarity, like, for example, deserving, or for example, just in previous videos. And so let's look at the idea of being right. So first of all, this one is interesting because it's something you will use after the fact. So for example, just and deserve, well, just it's, well, those could also be used after the fact to some extent, but I think this one even more. So the idea of being right, I was right. So what does it mean exactly that one was right? So let's remember, or let's say the assumptions we already removed. So for example, the assumption that there is a possible alternative. So the idea that things could have been different or should have been different, like there is the Big Bang and it's the main cause, and then it has consequences, and there is this continuity of consequences. There is no point in which some sort of agent, whatever agent means, that is something immune to the laws of physics, immune to causality, completely independent from previous causes, which doesn't make sense, could split this line of causality into. So we know already that could doesn't make sense. Um, so let's look at being right. So let's say that I go to the casino and I say, I think it's going to be red. So I play the roulette. It's either red or black. And I say, it's going to be red. I'm sure it's going to be red. And me or someone else bet $1. And it comes out red. And I'm like, I was right. But was I? So first of all, what will be the alternative? So what is the alternative in this case to I was right? It could be I was lucky. So I bet on the red, the roulette spin, and I say I was lucky. Makes sense? I guess some people will say I was lucky, some people will say I was right. But let's say someone say, I believe Bitcoin is the future. I believe AI is the future. I believe, I don't know, Asia is the future. And then let's say it happens. So Bitcoin goes up, or some AI becomes really popular, or some AI stocks go up, or Asian economies develop faster than European or American economies. And then one can say, I was right. But why? Why not say I was lucky? But then there could be other cases. Like, let's say I say, I'm sure I switched off the heating. I leave the house and for many months, let's say, and I need to switch off the heating just to save money. So I say, I'm sure I switch off the heating. And maybe someone else say, no, your partner say, no, you did not. Yeah, I did switch off the heating. You did not. They go back to the house, and actually it was switched off. I was right. I did switch off. I told you I switched off the heating. Well, you could say I was lucky I switched off the heating. It doesn't seem to make sense. So when exactly, so the criteria is always going to be to provide more clarity. So when exactly saying right versus saying lucky is going to provide more clarity? Why? So in the roulette, yeah, maybe it feels like it's more logical to say I was lucky. And maybe in the case of the heating, of turning off the heating in the house, maybe it feels that it makes more sense to say I was right, possibly. Then there are many cases in the middle. So where exactly does lucky end and right starts, and right ends and lucky starts? It's like a continuum, lucky, right. But where exactly does one start and the other end, lucky and right? Well, it's difficult, of course, because in some way outcomes are unpredictable only because of ignorance. That is, if we knew everything about the initial state of the universe and we had infinite computing power, then we could predict every next state. Now, there are issues with this. The first issue is that there is also a possibility, it seems, this is kind of, I think, science doesn't have a definitive answer for this, but that there may be randomness. So as far as we know today, there actually are events that are random, and it's basically the decay of particles. So let's say if you have an atom of gold or an atom of hydrogen or whatever, they have a certain probability at any given time to basically explode, to decay, it's called. So they don't last forever. So the atom of something doesn't last forever. It has a certain expected lifespan. But what is interesting, I'm just making a small parenthesis. So what is interesting in this, the way this lifespan work, is that it's purely probabilistic, meaning that its current age does not matter. So for a human, you say humans have an expected lifespan of, let's say, 75 years. So of course, people can die at any time. You can die at 10 years old, 20, 30, 40, or 90, it doesn't matter. But in general, the probability is not the same. So the probability of dying at 10 years old is much lower than the probability of dying at 90 years old. So at yes, of course, you may, some guy is 10 and he may die the next year, and some person is 90 and may live 5 more years. So of course there is an element of randomness, but there is a very strong correlation between current age and probability of death. So it's not completely random. It is not independent from causality. It's dependent from current age. So there is a correlation between current age and probability of death. Now for those atoms, it's not the case. So basically, if you create in a lab, let's say an atom of gold or an atom of whatever, an atom of hydrogen, and so it's, let's say it's just born, this atom, you created a second ago, it has a certain probability to decay, let's say in the next 1 minute, that is identical to maybe an atom of hydrogen, which is 1 billion years old. So this is actually a case where there is complete independence, as far as we know today, that there is completely independence from causality. So there is nothing external or even internal inside it that can cause an increase or decrease in the probability of decay, of explosion of this particle, of this atom. So of course, every atom has a different probability, but the age of this atom is irrelevant. So as at the moment, the belief is that this is purely random. Of course, maybe it's not. Maybe it's kind of determined in some way that we are not able to assess, to determine, and it just appear random. It's very hard to when you see something to tell if it's truly random or if it just appears random. Of course, if it doesn't appear random, most likely it's not random. But if it appears random, it's very hard to tell if it's truly random or if it's not random. But let's close this parenthesis because it's probably not interesting for most of the people listening. So the idea is things are either causal as in a chain, or some events like decay of particles can be completely random. But either way, there is no agent as some kind of spatial agent that makes independent decision, and we will have to define what decision means. So it can either be there can either be random. Well, for sure there is some element of well, actually, a huge element of cause and effect, and maybe there is also an element of randomness, maybe, but for sure there is no element of agency. I mean, for sure, it doesn't look like. So we don't want to transform the lack of a belief in a new belief, but it looks like that there isn't something as an agent. It wouldn't really make sense. It will be completely incoherent with everything we know. It will go against everything we know. So it doesn't look very likely that there is this agent. But what I wanted to say is like, so yeah, even with the potentially, even with infinite computing power, we still couldn't predict what is going to happen, because there is the element of randomness. Plus, there is the fact that if we knew what is going to happen, let's say I have access to some supercomputer, even if it was in a parallel universe, so it doesn't affect this universe, but as soon as this supercomputer tell me what is going to happen, it could potentially influence this universe. So realistically, there is no real way to know the future. Well, one, because maybe there is an element of randomness, looks like there is, true randomness, that is something that is independent from causality. And second, because even if there was some kind of magic computer in a separate universe that would not affect this universe and could make the prediction, in order for us to have the prediction, I mean, once we get the prediction, then we could influence this universe and it could change the outcome. So realistically, we cannot predict the future, but still we can try to imagine, so that to some extent, so the future could be determined but still completely unpredictable, because if you could predict, you could affect it, or there could be the randomness. But either way, let's say the future is either the result of our ignorance or of randomness. So there is no real way in which one can say I was right, because right about what? Right about the future. But the future is unpredictable, because either because of randomness, or even if there was no randomness, and even if there was a magical computer that knows everything about the current universe and can predict the future and can compute so what is going to happen based on the initial state and infinite calculating power, it could predict every consequence from the initial state and go faster than reality. So it could predict, let's say, 1 year in the future, and it exists in a separate universe, so it doesn't influence this universe. I mean, maybe then it could make the prediction, but you couldn't access the prediction, so it's useless. And if you could access the prediction, then you could change this universe, because now it's influenced by the prediction. So when you say that you can be right, what does it mean exactly? I mean, right about what? Right about something unpredictable? Well, doesn't really make sense. I mean, you cannot be right about something which is unpredictable, because right means that you made a prediction. To some, not always. The case of did you turn off the heating, yes or no, is actually not a prediction. It's about remembering if you did close it or not. You can, of course, make a mistake. Maybe you remember that you closed it and you didn't. But it's not about the future. So the idea is, can you be right about the future? Well, maybe you can be lucky about the future, but maybe also there are degrees of luck and right. So let's look more into it. So when you say I was right, again, you imply that there is something to be right about. So that you made the right prediction. That if it's about the future, that's effectively what you're saying. You're saying I was right in the sense that I made the right prediction. But then we also know that the future is unpredictable. So let's look at the roulette again. So I say, I think it's going to be red. We spin the wheel and it's red. Was I right? Was I lucky? In this case, everyone will agree that I was lucky, because we all know that it's impossible to predict the roulette. But now maybe certain things are possible to predict. Like, yes, the future is unpredictable because everything I said before. But certain things to some extent are predictable, because yes, there may be some randomness. Yes, it's chaotic in nature. Yes, if there was this infinitely powerful computer that could calculate the next state of the universe and it gives you the feedback, it could influence the future. Yes, yes, yes. But I could predict, for example, that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. Now, yes, there is this randomness, and those atoms, they decay at random times, and they are independent from causality, maybe. Yes, but the sun is still going to rise tomorrow, most likely. Now, this will not always be the case. I mean, at some point, I guess the sun maybe will explode, so it will not rise, or the earth will be engulfed by the sun. I mean, we don't know, but most likely we will be dead by then. So we will not experience it. We will never experience, we will always experience the sun rising till we live. It's our life, which is the short thing that our life will cease way before the sun stops rising. Unless there is something really crazy, like a supernova explodes and we all instantly die. But then we just instantly die, so we are weaker than the sun. So it's our life that is going to stop before the sun stops rising. So actually, if I say the sun is going to rise tomorrow, and it does rise, I can say I was right. If I spin the roulette and I say it's going to be red, and it's red, can I really say I was right? Probably not. Probably I have to say I was lucky. So what exactly is the difference? Well, we could say the degree of predictability. So everyone will agree that it's highly predictable that the sun will rise tomorrow, and it's very difficult or impossible to predict which color will come out in the roulette. So if predictability is the key metric for saying, using the word right or the word lucky, then how do we determine predictability? So the first thing should be, is it predictable? So before we say, can we predict it, we should say, is it predictable? Is it in its nature to be predictable? So we can say, well, the roulette is unpredictable by its nature, and the sun rising is predictable by its nature. So if I say the sun is going to rise, and it does rise, I can say I was right. And if the sun does not rise, or let's say more likely I say the sun will not rise tomorrow, but then it does rise, then I can say I was wrong. If I say it's going to be red, the roulette turns, it's red, I can say I was lucky. If it comes out black, then I can say I was unlucky, probably. Probably unlucky is a better word than wrong. So because the roulette is not predictable, then I'm going to use lucky or unlucky. Because the sun rising is predictable, I'm going to use right or wrong. But then how do we determine if something is predictable? This, of course, is not easy. On the extremes, it's easy. Of course, the sun rising is highly predictable, and the roulette is highly unpredictable. But what is in between? What is it? So let's say I say I will not get cancer in the next 10 years. And then I don't get it, and I say I was right. But maybe I was just lucky. I mean, is it predictable to get cancer or not in the next 10 years? Well, I will have to look at the statistical studies. Like, clearly, if I have some genes that give me a high probability of cancer, to some extent, it's predictable that I have a high chance of getting it. If I don't have those genes, still I am at the baseline, and I have to study what is the baseline. So in general, the idea is to assess if something is predictable. Now, of course, this is a very huge topic, so we cannot go too much into every single detail, but I want to give kind of a strategy that I think can be useful for this type of problem. And the strategy is that if you believe that you're right about something, so you think that basically it's predictable. You think you're right about something because it's predictable. So that if it happens, it's not going to be that you're lucky, but it's going to be that you're right. How do you use your mind in an effective way to be sure that it is predictable? So that you will, if it happens, you will be right and not lucky. How do you kind of filter in advance that this is something predictable? I think a good strategy is to basically describe as clearly as you can why it is inevitable. So being right is not about being right. Being right is about explaining or predicting something that is inevitable or as inevitable as possible. So if I bet on the red on the roulette, and I spin the roulette, which is very chaotic, it's every time it's different. So if it comes out red, I mean, yeah, I could debate if to say I'm right or I'm lucky, but the reality is I cannot say that it was inevitable. No one will accept that. I cannot say it was inevitable that it was red. If it's not inevitable, it means that it could very well not have happened. So it was not so predictable. And if it was not so predictable, then there is a strong element of luck. So what about the sun rising? Well, the sun rising, is it inevitable that the sun rises? Well, based on our understanding of astronomy and physics and whatever, and our experience in having seen it happen since forever, there is no ancient text which mentioned that one day the sun did not rise. Even if, again, let's say that there could be cases, it depends how you interpret the sun not rising, because of course rising is an illusion. Nothing is actually rising, the earth is turning. But let's say that there was a massive eruption of a supermassive volcano and all the skies get completely black, which this has never happened, because even when there was this kind of eruption, the sun is still visible. It's not, but let's imagine it's so strong that the sun is just completely blocked. Well, someone could argue, here it is, the sun has not risen, because of course it has become invisible, but technically it has not risen. So the inevitability, I think, is the criteria for choosing between saying I was right or I was lucky. And this is very important because it kind of indicates that most of the effort happens before and not after. It's not really about if you were right, which can be confusing, and how do you really know if you were right or not. So the trial, let's say, if we want to judge if someone was right or lucky, it shouldn't really happen after the fact. It's not really about looking at what happened and say, he was right, or saying, he was lucky. It's like someone saying, no, I was right, like, so you were lucky. I mean, how do you end that debate? Like someone say, my gut feeling told me that was going to be red. And you say, yeah, but that was random. You just got lucky. No, I knew it was going to be red. But the fact that he knew that it was going to be red, or he had a very strong gut feeling, does it mean that it was inevitable that it was going to be red? And the answer is no, it could very well have been black. So then he was, even if he knew for sure that it was going to be red, but it was not inevitable, then he was lucky. Of course, it's not that everything is completely black and white and certain things are completely inevitable and others are completely random. It's not just 100% inevitability and pure randomness. There is a continuum again. But it's interesting to look at the degree of inevitability. So someone saying Bitcoin, I knew Bitcoin will go up. So the question should immediately shift to, was it inevitable? And then one has to look at what exactly had happened. So step by step, all the events and also the possible events that could have happened. And then start to think, if it was inevitable. So maybe there could have been a bug early on that would have crashed it. Maybe it could have been made illegal at some point, but this wouldn't necessarily have guaranteed its failure. Maybe it would have been illegal somewhere, but not somewhere else. Maybe it could have been replaced by a better one. So for example, someone could have made Bitcoin 2.0 or something like Supercoin or whatever, and everyone would have moved to Supercoin, especially if, let's say, Bitcoin has a major bug. So let's say someone creates Supercoin and it's very similar to Bitcoin with a few differences. Maybe it has some differences, and then let's say Bitcoin has a major bug, it crashes and it's down for a few days, and so people switch to Supercoin because Supercoin doesn't have this bug, so they realize it doesn't have this vulnerability, and then they feel that it's safer, and then Bitcoin is dead. Now maybe crypto as a concept is not dead because it's Supercoin, but Bitcoin is dead. So there were many cases in which things could have went wrong. Like maybe, I don't know, let's say it had been made illegal in the countries which, let's say that, like for example, the main exchanges are, let's say, I think, like either in the US or in China at the moment. So what if China and the US had made it completely illegal? Well, then maybe those business will not have developed, and without those exchanges, then maybe it will not have succeeded. So someone could say, yeah, but it could always have been legal somewhere. Well, yes, but you need the businessman to develop the exchange, and if it's illegal in the country which ended up developing the main exchanges, then it could not have worked. So you can start to discuss the degree to which it was inevitable. And the nice thing about the concept of inevitability is that you can do it ex post, so after the fact, but also ex ante, that is before the fact. So when you make a prediction, you can start to think how inevitable it is. And the more you can, of course, it will never be perfect because you will always make some mistakes or forget some things, etc. But you will get an idea that is that if it happens, how much was luck, how much was skill, let's say, how much was being right, how much was being lucky. So if you notice that there are many factors that lead you to believe that it's very inevitable, then if it happens, you were probably right. And in theory, you should be right, because if it's completely inevitable, there is no alternative to being right. Sorry, I think I said unpredictable. If it's completely unavoidable, it has to happen. So if it's completely unavoidable, then it must happen anyway. So there is not even a debate about right or wrong. It was just unavoidable. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not really about right or wrong or lucky or unlucky, which are kind of distorting words to some extent. Because again, I mean, of course, there are cases where it's obvious it's luck. There are cases where it's obvious it's predictable, that is, so it's about being right. But if we look at those four words, right, wrong, lucky, unlucky, we could discuss the core element that they have together is the element of predictability. And predictability is better explored through its opposite. So not to say it's predictable because of A, B, C, D, but it's better to invert the problem and say, try to demonstrate or explain that it is unavoidable. So can I demonstrate that it is unavoidable for the sun to rise tomorrow? Yes. It's easy if you know a little bit about astronomy and physics and history. Yes, you can explain very well why it is unavoidable that the sun is going to rise tomorrow. But can you explain why it is unavoidable that the roulette is going to be red at the next spin? No, because it's not unavoidable. It's obviously not unavoidable. So then it's obviously not predictable, because if it's not unavoidable, it's not predictable. The more it's unavoidable, the more it's predictable, because a prediction is always one prediction versus many predictions. Now, if something is unavoidable, then there is only one possible outcome. So it's not really a prediction, it's just that there is only one possible outcome anyway. If it's completely unavoidable, there is only one possible outcome. If it's avoidable, there is at least two or more outcomes. And if there is a very, very large number of outcomes, then we consider it's random, or at least if they are equal. So if there is 50% chance it's red, 50% chance it's black, then basically we consider that it's random. Um, so yeah, so it's the concept of avoidability. So how, or unavoidability. So how unavoidable is something? If it's completely unavoidable, then you're right. But you're right just because you managed to identify something which is unavoidable. So you are right not because you're right. You're not right because you're smart or whatever. You're right because you managed to identify something which is inherently unavoidable. So if you say that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, that doesn't make you smart. You just identified some phenomena that is inherently, intrinsically unavoidable. If you say it, and then if you say, of course, that the roulette spin is unavoidable and it comes out red, then you're just stupid. But that's another story. So, and the nice thing of unavoidability is that the analysis can be done again before or after. So you can do it before the event happens, but also after the event has happened. Someone told you, yeah, I bought Nvidia stock like 10 years ago and I was right. I was right about AI. So then the question should be even, and of course, let's say now we know that Nvidia stock went up a lot, and the question is, was it unavoidable? And the beauty of the question, was it unavoidable, is we can ask it before the fact happens or after. It allows us to see if it was unavoidable. So was it unavoidable that Nvidia stock went up so much? Well, one could say clearly we could tell the trend of AI. Well, yes, but there were many trends that didn't work out. Or let's say I remember trends like, for example, 3D printing. But they didn't become that big. They look like hot trends, 3D printing, but they didn't become that big. Or maybe other trends, but I cannot remember now. So not all trends became that big. Some trends started but didn't continue. But also, sometimes a trend starts and it's very difficult to understand which company is going to benefit. So let's say, for example, the trend of smartphones. Well, you could tell, of course, because Apple did the first smartphone. But then what would have predicted that Samsung would have benefit? I suspect that, and I'm not even sure actually because I don't know how much phone sales are influenced, let's say, the revenue of Samsung. But clearly Samsung had benefited a lot probably from smartphones because they became a big player. But what could have predicted that Samsung, I mean, maybe people could have predicted Nokia will be a big player, but turned out it was Samsung. But who would have knew 20 years ago that, well, 20 years maybe is too early, but still 20 years ago Nokia phone existed and Samsung as a company existed, just that Nokia was the leader in well, not smartphone but in cell phones, and Samsung was not making phones. And turned out that Samsung now is probably, together with Apple, leader in smartphones. And Nokia, I don't know if it's still there. I mean, if it's still there, then it's quite small. It's not very important in the market of smartphones. So when we look at things, we sometimes realize that actually maybe they were not so unavoidable. Yes, they did happen, but were they unavoidable? But again, certain things can be unavoidable. So that's why it's interesting when we want to make a prediction or a decision, which is usually the same, because at the end of the day, we make predictions to make decisions. We have to try to think how unavoidable that outcome is. It's not really about trying to say the probability or if it's luck or skill. It's really how unavoidable is this thing. So unavoidable is the word to use. It's an effective word. It's a word that gives more clarity. It's not about right, I was right. It's more, it was unavoidable. But then you have to explain with facts. You cannot say my gut feeling tells me it was unavoidable. You have to explain clearly with facts why it was unavoidable. And if you can, and if it is unavoidable, then it's not even that you're right, it's just that it was unavoidable. And if it was not unavoidable, then it's that you were lucky. So there is not much room left for being right, because either it was unavoidable and you knew it in advance and also after the fact that it was unavoidable, so you just pick the thing that was unavoidable. There was nothing to be right about, it was just unavoidable. So either you pick the thing which is unavoidable, or if you don't, then you're lucky. But there is no room for right. It's just either unavoidable or you're lucky. And of course, sometimes it's not completely unavoidable, but maybe it's mostly unavoidable. So someone could say, well, this company is leader in its industry, it's a very hot market, this market is clearly the future. I mean, I think personally, when I was like 16 and I started using the internet, I was certain, and I really think the expansion of the internet was unavoidable. I mean, this thing was so good. It was so superior to everything else. At the time, you had just phone calls and fax. Fax, where you put a piece of paper and it replicates it on the other side. I mean, the internet was so incredible that you make a single connection to an internet provider. It was called, you will use a modem to connect to an internet provider, and then you were on the internet, and it was a network, so you could read email, you could browse the web, you could download files, you could chat, you could do everything on that single network, which was very new, and it was just so much better than anything else, than any other alternative. So I was like, this is unavoidable. Yes, I'm absolutely confident that the internet, the success of the internet, the expansion of the internet was almost unavoidable. Of course, there can always be some rare event that changed the course of history. But in general, I would say it was probably unavoidable that the internet would be a huge success. If someone wanted to profit from the internet, well, that was more difficult because initially in the early days, people thought that it would be the phone companies that would mostly profit. Turned out it was not. It was certain companies that built services for the internet, like Google, Amazon, like Netflix. Those were the big winners. But won you? I remember actually in 95, I think in 95 or 96, they did the IPO of Amazon, and I think it was $500 million. And I remember, I think I was 16, and I was like, that's crazy. Like, this company is just born, it makes so little revenue, and it's worth 500 million. That's ridiculous. It's a bubble, and actually it was a bubble. Well, not yet. It will then, I guess, make a big bubble in 2000, and then it will crash 80%, but then it will eventually recover. So it was not unavoidable that it would be Amazon or Google or Netflix to be the winners. So if someone bought those, to some extent, there was some element of luck. But then again, I'm just remembering stuff. So I remember before Google, there was Alta Vista and the Hotbot and Yahoo and Lycos, minor search engines. And then one day Google came out. This is way before the IPO. I don't remember, maybe 2003. I don't really remember. And I tried Google and I was like, wow, this is incredible. It's like, this is like a million times better than the other search engines. There is just no comparison. Like, and I knew like I will never go back. So Google becomes my homepage, and I just will never ever go back to any other search engine. And at the time, I would help some of my friends to configure to buy a modem and configure it and connect to the internet. And I would just maybe someone, they had issues with their computer, so I will try to help. And maybe I notice they're using Yahoo or they're using Alta Vista, and I'm like, no, use Google. And I show them Google, and I'm like, just always use Google, like forget about the rest. And they try Google like a few times. Oh yeah, okay, got it. So now, of course, certain events could have happened. Maybe some new company could have come out with an even better search engine. But to me, it was kind of obvious. I think it was inevitable. If you had tried Google, if you had tried the previous search engines before Google, like Alta Vista, Yahoo, etc., and then you had tried Google, it was like night and day. It was like obvious. It was inevitable that Google will be the search engine that will kill those search engines. Now, again, maybe, of course, there will be exceptions. Maybe they quickly develop a new technology to catch up, or some new large corporation develop, like Microsoft tried, for example, with Bing. When Google started to be big, Microsoft tried to get in. Maybe Microsoft could have succeeded. I mean, this was not inevitable that Microsoft would have failed. But there is some element, I think, of inevitability when you look at Google was just so much superior. It was just night and day. So one could have said, I predict that Google will be the search engine. Now, again, that was not completely inevitable because some new big company could have entered and maybe made a better technology, etc., etc. But still, there was a certain degree of inevitability. It was not like the roulette. So I think this should be the thinking we should be having. It's like, to which degree we believe something is inevitable. So, and again, this can be done before or after. So let's say a new product comes out and we think, wow, this is going to be the future. We should ask ourselves, to which degree it is inevitable that this product is the future? And of course, it's not an exact science, it's kind of an art to make this assessment, but still, it's very valuable. And then we can either believe that it is completely inevitable, so this has nothing to do with luck, but nothing to do with being right either, it was just inevitable. Or we can believe that it's completely random, then it's just luck. Or we can believe that it's somewhat inevitable, and so it's a mix between a certain degree of inevitability and a certain degree of luck. But it's never about being right. It's always about being able to assess how much something is inevitable in first place and after the fact.